Okay, good evening. It's 7:15, and so I will begin the Shiur. Um, I'd like to dedicate the Shiur as usual, firstly in memory of Rachel Imenu, and also in light of the present situation in Israel, I'd also like to dedicate the Shiur with a prayer for the defense of our boys in the security forces in the army, and also with those that are being held captive, that God should return them soon. Um, as I did last week, I decided to record uh, I decided to put up this morning. I'll put up what Rav Nir talked about this morning and translate. Um, I can see with the beginning of the new year, things are changing quite a bit, and what Rav Nir talks about during the day or the day before is extremely relevant, and people have questions. What is the Rav saying? So I thought it probably would be more appreciated if I just put up what the Rav said this morning, and I've chosen about 20-25 minutes of what he said. So I'll play what he says. I'll play like a phrase or a phrase and a half, and then I will translate as I did last week. So first, I'm just going to share screen and call up the. All right, it's all of. I will send a link in the WhatsApp group. In the WhatsApp group, I will share a link. But anyone who does Google, you can do Google search either Harav Nir Ben Artzi, Shiur Chai, or you can do Ta'ir Neri, and it all pops up. As I said, I'm going to play. There's a long clip, about 20 minutes, and then there's an addition. I'm going to jump in different clips and translate.
מעכשיו זה ייגמר, אני אומר לכם. בעולם מכניע את כולם לחזור בתשובה כולם.
With this, I'm just translating. You'll get into what he's talking about. We're starting already at minute 12 and 52 seconds. With this, everything ends. God's intent is to bring everyone back to tshuva, all the Jews to lachzor b'tshuva. That is what God is intending to do.
זה לא יעזור, זה לא יפסיק. ונכנס לזה עכשיו עד הסוף. זה לא עוד...
And this process of bringing the nation to Chazara b'tshuva is now not going to stop. It was slowly building up. What Rav Nir is talking about, and you'll hear in a moment, God slowly built up the pressure in order to help educate Am Yisrael in order to lachzor b'tshuva. But now we are in fifth gear, we are in high gear, moving forward for Chazara b'tshuva. This is not, do not think that this is simply a war that will end and then things go on as usual. That is not the situation now. This war is the war to end all wars, as to quote what they said about World War I. This war is not going to end like the other wars. God prepared the ground for this war. He brought in Corona. He brought in the various raids with the Hezbollah and Hamas. He brought in the Hafganot, all the protests that we had for the past half a year or more. All of this was in preparation in order to prepare us now for this war, which is the final tactic that God is using in order to bring the nation Chazara b'tshuva, the whole nation, lachzor b'tshuva.
ועכשיו את המלחמה הקשה הזאת, הכי קשה בעולם, והוא לא מפסיק עד שכל עם ישראל לשמאל וימין יהיו ככה.
And God has brought us to this point, and this war will not end. The pressure will continue, and it will not stop. This war will not stop until Am Yisrael is united like this.
יהיה להם אהבת חינם ביניהם, מי שיהודי הכוונה.
And what will be at the end of the day, there will be ahavat chinam, love of our fellow man will result at the end of this process. Okay, and what just a side comment, what Rav Nir mentioned 2 days ago is that this is the war that we are fighting is the war against Amalek. The Hamas are the descendants of Amalek, and this is the war of Amalek that was supposed to have been completed, in the times of Shaul and whatnot, and now it is going to be completed, which means it is the end of all evil. But the tool that is necessary in order to be victorious against Amalek is achdut, is unity in the people. That tool is critical.
מי שחיים גויה אז הוא גוי. אין לו נשמה, זה יהודי רק שיחזור בתשובה מלאה. הקדוש ברוך הוא אומר לכם, לעם ישראל, אתם תחרישון ואני אלחם בשבילכם. מה שקורה בעם ישראל, מה שקורה לעם ישראל, זה בכדי שיאמינו בדברי השם.
God is saying that I will bring victory to you. You will sit, you will do what has to be done, but I will bring victory to you.
את העולם עד הרגע הזה, רוצים הערבים סביבנו להשמידנו, את העם היהודי ואת ארץ ישראל. המודיעין והשב"כ גם הם אומרים את זה בעצמם, היו בשאננות ורשלנות.
Now, what is being stressed now is, and now people are finally beginning to understand, the Arabs never intended to have peace with us. Never intended to have peace with us. All these peace treaties that were, whether it was Camp David, Jordan, whatever, it's not real peace. And the security, the Shabak knew that this wasn't real peace, but unfortunately what happened, they lulled themselves into a sense of confidence. That is what occurred right before the war. This is why Hamas was able to do what it was able to do last Shabbat.
עם ישראל צריך להבין את הכאב העצום. כשיש פילוג בעם, מחלוקת, פילוג, בעם ישראל אין הגנה ושמירה על העם היהודי.
What Am Yisrael has to understand is the spiritual reason why Hamas was able to be successful in the initial attack was because we were not united. And when you have pilug, when you have disunity in the nation, then you are vulnerable, and that is why Hamas was able to succeed in what they were able to do. There is huge anger. God has huge anger because of the disunity that was in the nation. Now, I want to highlight that. A few days ago, Rav Nir mentioned, he's saying, do not look to who to blame here on this war. Don't look to blame any specific leader. Don't blame the right. Don't blame the left. Don't blame the religious. Don't blame the secular. We are all to blame. Everyone had a shiur to blame in this, and we have to understand we are one people. We are one people. We all will take responsibility, and what's more important is we will understand what the goal is now. We have to be united. Right and left have to be united. Religious and secular have to be united.
אז אין להם הגנה מתבטלת, אין להם שום הגנה. עם ישראל הוא חזק שהם באחדות מלוכדים, לא מפולגים. מפולגים, עם ישראל חד ושלום בפילוג, אין לו הגנה ואין לו שמירה לשמאל ולימין.
And what has to be understood is that our strength is when we are unified. If we are not unified, we have no strength. Our strength is contingent on our unity. As separate sects, whether right, separate from left, or religious, separate from secular, or however you want to split us up, that makes us vulnerable. And the key is unity.
לא משנה מה שיהיו. גם בעל ואישה ביניהם שיש פילוג ביניהם, הילדים נהרסים, הבית נהרס, מלאך המוות מסתובב להם בתוך הבית.
And this is comparable to better understand. Rav Nir now will use an example. He says, when there's no peace, for example, if there's no peace in a home, when husband and wife argue and there's no peace, at the end of the day, you end up destroying the children. Okay, so that is similar what occurs to Am Yisrael. And Rav Nir will explain more. You have to understand, when there is no unity in a house, then the angel of death is walking around that house. And although the words are very harsh, what you have to understand, in other words, this negative force that is created by lack of unity between husband and wife, it causes this spiritual negative force, which Rav Nir calls the angel of death, to go around that house. And it ends up slowly destroying the whole family. That is the result when you do not have unity. So what you have to understand is, when there is disunity, the angel of death walks around the house. In order to drive out the angel of death from that house, you have to have unity. You have to have the husband and wife together in order to drive away the angel of death from that house. What occurs is when there's unity, when the husband and wife are together, then it brings the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah will drive away the angel of death. That is why a house that has unity, where the husband and wife are together, there's Shekhinah. That Shekhinah is that positive force which drives away all the negative force.
יצרה אדומה, כי יש מחלוקת. למה מלאך המוות? למה מלאך קשה? לא יצרה רגיל. כי בעל ואישה שלום ביניהם יש שכינה יולדת. שכינה זה כוח עצום מעליו. לנו יש אבא ואמא זה שכינה. השכינה שהבעל ואישה בשלום ביניהם, ואישה שומרת נידה וכיסוי ראש, שכינה בבית.
So what happens is, going further into the explanation, when the husband and wife, so he used the terms Abba and Ima. Abba and Ima, these aside just to fill in what's not being fully explained. Abba, in Kabbalah, there are different names used for different, how should I say, different character traits of God, different leadership qualities that God uses. One of the qualities, it's called partsufim. One of the faces of God is called Abba. Another face of God, the more female side, is called Ima. Okay, so Abba and Ima are actually holy names of God. When we use the term Abba and Ima, when children use the term Abba and Ima, it's actually referring to there's a divine quality. Okay, and we here on earth are imitating what God does. Okay. Now, what occurs is when there is harmony between Abba and Ima, between the husband and wife, then the Ima, the Shekhinah, is strengthened. And the Shekhinah has certain powers in order to drive away death. Death, the death, you have to understand, death at a spiritual level represents all of evil. Okay, there's good and there's bad. So when we say death, we're talking about the forces of evil in the world. So in order to drive away the forces of evil in the world, Ima, the Shekhinah, has to be strong. The only way the Shekhinah will be strong is when there's unity between Abba and Ima, between husband and wife.
אם אין שלום בית, השכינה עוזבת. צריך לבוא כוח עוצמתי כמו הכוח של השכינה מכוח הטומאה כדי להיכנס לבית. לא יבוא איזה מלאך קטן כדי להבין, להסביר לכם את זה יותר טוב, מלאך היצרה סתם איזה משועמם. בעוצמתי של מלאך עוצמתי כדי לקחת את הקדושה שהייתה שכינה בבית שלכם ושהייתם בשלום.
Okay, so what happens is that in order to understand what occurs is that if there is not unity, then an evil force begins sneaking into the house in order to suck off any holiness that was in the house. So it's never 100% evil, 100% good. right? So house probably had some good. But then what happens is when there's disunity between the husband and wife, then this evil angel can get in and begin drinking off and pulling away any of the mitzvot, any of the positive forces that were in that house, and they take it for their uses. Okay, and then the disunity grows stronger and stronger, and the Shekhinah, the mother, becomes weaker and weaker. Okay, this is descriptions of what you have to understand is what I'm using very simple terms of the physical world, but you have to understand these are terms that relate to the spiritual world, because this world is not only physical, this world is also spiritual. So in order to understand what's occurring when all of this occurs, whether there's unity in a household or not, you have to understand that when there's disunity, then the evil force gets in, the positive force of the Shekhinah can no longer drive away the evil force, and the evil force grows more and more in the house and ends up literally destroying the family. And so the Shekhinah obviously needs great power. In order to drive away death, the Shekhinah needs to have this strength. So therefore, you have to have the unity so that the Shekhinah will be strong enough in order to drive away any of the negative forces. Okay, so therefore, we always have to concentrate and ensure that we have unity in our household, working together, that husband and wife, Ima V'Abba, are together. And this and all of this, don't forget, this is an example that is being used in order to stress also the unity that has to be in the nation. Because everything that Harav Nir is talking about now in terms of specifically a family example is also applicable to Am Yisrael. In order for the Shekhinah to be strong in Am Yisrael, in order for the Shekhinah to be strong in Am Yisrael and drive away the evil forces, whether it be Hamas in terms of the material world, or the angel of death in the spiritual world, in order for the Shekhinah and Am Yisrael to drive it away, we have to be united. That these are general principles of how the world functions. You can argue if you want to, but these are the facts. These are the principles on how the world functions. And what Harav Nir is stressing is you have to understand the world, there's a spiritual world which drives this material world. And in order to understand how the spiritual forces work, you have to understand the importance of unity. He's saying, I'm not against anybody, I'm not cursing anybody, I'm simply explaining to you what the principles are so that you can understand and function accordingly.
שיש פילוג בעם ישראל, נכנסים הליכי חבלה בין היהודים ועושים לחסר להפמיד את היהודים.
So now then he ties it up to Am Yisrael. So he says, and so therefore, when there is disunity in the nation, then the angel of death gets into the nation, and the angel of death will have power in order to kill people in our nation. That's the principle that is involved to understand what we have to do in order to defend the nation. In other words, once again, I'm just going to stress the fact, obviously you do your physical steps. You build, you train your soldiers and you send out the army. But you also have to understand that there are spiritual steps that have to be done. And the spiritual steps that have to be done, that each and every one of us has to work on unity in the nation, of loving our fellow man, our fellow Jew.
אסור להאמין לגויים, דיברנו על זה כבר 32 שנה. אין אמונה בגויים.
And he says, you have to understand, it is forbidden to believe what the goyim will be telling us. And he's referring to whether it's the Arab nations, it's, talk nicely to fool us, or whether it's the Europeans or the United States or the Western nations, whoever it is, you cannot believe what they're telling you. They have their own interests.
לא יהיה שלום עם הגויים, לא יהיה שלום לא עם החמאס, לא עם הג'יהאד, לא עם מצרים, ולא עם ירדן, ולא עם טורקיה, ולא עם יחיד האמירויות, ולא עם סעודיה, ולא עם סוריה, ולא עם אף אחד בעולם. לא יהיה שלום, יהיה שלום מזויף. יהיה כאילו שלום בשמרית עין.
There will never be peace with the nations of the world. Never. Don't think that there'll be peace with Hamas, and the peace that we have with the other Arab countries, it's a false peace. It's not really peace.
בגלל הכסף, בגלל השלום, בגלל פחדים אחד על השני, אז צריכים את הכוח של האמריקאים, שהגנו עליהם מהסעודיה, וישראל תגן עליהם, אז עושים את השלום, לא בגלל שיוצאים שלום מהלב, זה שלום מזויף.
He says it's not real peace with the other Arab countries. They do it for money. They're doing it for the American money or whatever they're doing. It's all money interest. That's the only reason why these countries have, quote, peace with us. But it's not real peace. It's not peace from the heart. They don't love us, and they have no intent of living calmly with us. They're only doing it right now for whatever interest, primarily money. That's why they have these relations with the state of Israel.
גם בעל ואישה שהולכים לערוץ זוגי, וכאילו עושים שלום ביניהם, ואחד שונא את השני, ואתה תפטרו אחד מהשני. אבל עשו שלום בגלל ילדים, עשו שלום בגלל זה, לא בגללם הם.
He says it's sort of like, it says it's comparable. It says the relationship with many of these Arab governments, whether it's like, for example, Egypt or Jordan. He says it's like a husband and wife who can't stand each other and basically decide to have peace amongst themselves for the children, for some other interest. But there's not real love there. So similarly with the Arab, with Egypt or with Jordan, there's no real love there. They don't really want peace with us.
שלום, מצרים הכל זה שלום מזויף, זה לא שלום. גם בעולם זה שלום. ירדן שלום, זה ירדן שלום. יש להם אינטרס, מקבלים מיליארדים מאמריקאים, מקבלים כסף מפה, הגנה מפה. יש להם מלחמה מצרים ממקומות אחרים, נלחמים על הכלכלה שלהם, על החיים שלהם. אז הם טוב להם ככה שקט בישראל, ובמקום להשקיע מיליארדים לשים בפח אשפה להילחם, אז הם יושבים בשקט, עשו שלום בישראל.
So he went more into details in terms of, for example, with Egypt, the only reason why Egypt has peace with us is only for the economic advantage. They're doing it for the American money, and they don't want to have the war right now. So it fits their purposes right now not to have war with us. But that's the only reason why they don't have war with us.
בלוף אחד שלם, עד שיצא משיח לאור. אל תהיו, אל תחשבו להאמין לאיזה מישהו, אל תאמינו לאף אחד.
He said, so there will not be peace with any of the nations of the world until Mashiach is revealed publicly. But before then, don't believe anything that the nations of the world tell us.
כל אדם כבדהו וחשדהו, זה בין יהודי ליהודי, ויותר בקל וחומר, יהודי לכיוון גוי.
You have to be suspicious of everyone. There's a Hebrew term that you should be wary of anyone, and that also applies to your fellow Jew. Don't be a fool and walk into a situation where they're going to fool you or cheat you. Okay, and if that also applies when you're, say, going into a store, okay, certainly it applies when you're dealing with an Arab country. You always have to be cautious. You always have to be on your toes and aware of what's happening.
זה תמיד לאף אחד, יש כאלה ערבים, עושה להם שלום, נותן להם מיליארדים, כסף, תן להם אפשר לחיות בשלום, אי אפשר לערב את הזרע היהודי עם זרע של גוי. אי אפשר לערב את המבט של היהודייה עם מבט של גוי של בעל חיים. אי אפשר להביא בעיניים של יהודי של רוחנית, נשמה בעיניו, להסתכל על גויה. אי אפשר להביא בחורה יהודייה קדושה קודש קודשים, שכנה בגופה להסתכל על ערבי או גוי. אי אפשר. זה הולכים נגד בעולם ישירות. אחר כך הם מקבלים את כל המחלות הקשות, ובהשם ישמוע מה המשכיות יש.
So, what Rav Nir basically explained now is saying that he says, listen, you have to be suspicious. You have to be cautious. You have to understand that assimilation is not possible. You can't have an assimilated culture with Arab nations or with the non-Jews. Assimilation doesn't work. It doesn't work. There's a degree of separation that has to be. We always stress the issue of separation in Judaism, and we have to be a nation separate from the other nations. If you tear down the walls of separation and you go towards assimilation, that angers God. It goes against the principles that God has set up in this world.
צריכים לחזור כולם בתשובה. אז אסור הפילוג הזה שבעם ישראל הביא גרם לכל מה שגרם פה.
Okay, so then he goes back to the main point. He's saying everyone has to lachzor b'tshuva, and you cannot have disunity in the nation. Everyone has to get back together.
כל מה שקרה השנה האחרונה, הפילוג הזה עשה נזקים קשים מאוד. זה הסוף, זה המלחמה האחרונה שתהיה.
Says, and unfortunately, the disunity that we had in the nation for this past year, namely the protests that we went through, says that disunity, that is why we now have this war. But to understand, this is the last war. This is, in other words, when Rav Nir says this is the last war, there's a war that we fix it. At the end of the day, at the end of this war, it will be fixed, and we will have true unity in the nation.
עם ישראל כוחו באחדות, בשלום ואחדות. בלי זה לא שווה כלום.
What you have to understand is the power of Am Yisrael is in unity and in shalom. That is our power, when we have harmony and unity in the nation.
בלי זה כמו כל הגויים. מה אצל הגויים, אתם חושבים? הורגים אחד את השני.
He says, without those two things, in other words, without unity and peace, right? Achdut and shalom. Without that, then we're like all the other nations of the world. Says, why do the nations of the world kill each other? Why does mankind have wars and kill each other? Because they're not into unity and peace. What Am Yisrael has to realize is their tool for success is unity and peace.
לוקחים את האישה של השני, את הילדים שלו, גונבים את הילדים שלו, את הכסף שלו, את החיים שלו, אין להם שום רחמים. אין להם טיפה של רחמים, אין אף אחד גוי בעולם שבו רחמים, כי אין לו נשמה. יהודי יש לו נשמה, זו רחמן, יהיה מה שיכעס פה ויתחרט.
He says the difference between the nations of the world and the Jewish people is that the nations of the world are willing to sacrifice their children. They have zero compassion on their children. They don't have compassion. The nation of Israel has compassion. That character trait of compassion is in Am Yisrael. That's why, a side point, that's why we say the test of if a person is a Jew is he's a Rahman ben Rahman. In other words, he's a compassionate person, the son of a compassionate person. In other words, the character trait of Rachamim is the character trait of Am Yisrael. The next point is, Rav Nir says, now everybody has to do their own soul searching where they made a mistake. Everyone in the nation has to ask themselves, okay, where did I fail? And thereby resulting in this war. In other words, the main failure is in unity. So we have to ask ourselves, every single person has to ask themselves, where did I fail in ensuring unity in the nation? And everyone has to ask where they failed and learn the lessons, whether it's the individual person, whether it's the army, whether it's the intelligence. Everyone has to ask the question, where did I fail? And then learn from it and move forward.
הדבר הזה לא נשכח ולא נסלח. תפסיקו להאשים את ממשלת ישראל.
Okay, saying what occurred, and as what occurred this past Shabbat will not be forgotten, will not be forgiven. But you have to stop blaming the government of Israel or stop blaming specific groups.
זה לא שייך. נכון שביניהם יש מריבות ומלחמות כל השרים. כל פעם הקדוש ברוך הוא כועס, שיפסיקו כל חברי הכנסת הימניים, 64 מנדטים, עכשיו יש גם גנץ איתם, תפסיקו להתערבב ולהיות עם שנאה רוע בלב שלכם. תפסיקו.
Okay, so he's saying, yeah, he says it's true that the Chavrei Knesset would bicker with each other and it angered God, but we have to stop blaming the government. There's 64 mandates, now Gantz has joined, so there's even more. We have to stop blaming one another. We have to stop blaming specifically, A is guilty, B is guilty. That has to stop. That is not, it's not relevant who's to blame right now. And the attitude has to be that saying we're all to blame and we all regret it and we're going to move forward. That has to be the attitude.
תפסיקו, אומר הקדוש ברוך הוא, כדאי לכם להפסיק, אומר הקדוש ברוך הוא, כדאי לכם להפסיק. אני אומר לכם, זה הקדוש ברוך הוא, כדאי לכם להפסיק.
God is pleading to Am Yisrael. He's telling you, stop blaming. Harav Nir repeated it several times that God is telling you to stop blaming the government or anyone else.
כדאי לכם להפסיק, להיות בשלום ביניכם, להיות בשלום ביניכם. כל חברי הכנסת השרים, להיות בשלום ביניכם.
And he's also talking to the Knesset members, saying, stop blaming one another. Everyone has to be in peace with one another. Unity is critical. Everyone has to be in harmony with one another. He says you have to stop blaming one another and trying to trip the other one. That has to stop. This is what God is saying. And you have to stop threatening to bring down the government because of money or because of some other interest. You have to stop all of that.
דוד המלך מלך ישראל מגויס בצה"ל, שאול המלך מגויס בצה"ל, אברהם אבינו מגויס בצה"ל, יצחק אבינו היה חלק, יעקב אבינו התגייס לצה"ל, ילדים.
So now Harav Nir says, listen, everyone would be drafted to the army. David HaMelech was drafted into the army. Avraham Avinu was drafted into the army. Everyone, and he says Yitzchak partially. But in other words, he's stressing the fact that no one is above doing army service here, helping out.
עוד הרבה גדולי העולם, גדולי תורה ענקים בצה"ל, נחמו על ארץ הקודש ועל הדת ועל הקדוש ברוך הוא.
Says throughout history, great learned people all were drafted into the army. Says God is saying, what are you talking about? He says everyone goes into the army.
הוא אומר בורא עולם, מי שלומד תורה באמת, מהבוקר עד כמה שעות, 8 שעות, גם לומד תורה באמת, שילמד תורה באמת. מי שלא שיתגייס.
And God is saying, he says, if a person learns Torah, really learns Torah, 8 hours a day, really, fine. So then he can learn Torah. Otherwise, go to the army.
מישהו שצחוק מהתורה שיתגייס כדאי לו, שחיילי צה"ל זה כמו לומדים תורה.
He says the person who isn't really learning, he should go to the army. He says going to the army is like learning Torah.
בורא עולם. כיפה או לא כיפה, אני אומר לכם, פה מדברים רק אמת ויושר, תפסיקו עם הדמיונות שלכם, הזקן בפאות וכובעים שחורים בליצנות. די עם השטויות האלה. יש גם, כי באמת זקן בכיפה בפאות ובאמת צדיקים. לא כולם ככה. רואים אתכם בתקשורת. תעשו שלום ביניכם, כל חברי הכנסת.
And he's telling once again with the Chavrei Knesset, he says, enough of putting on the ad, stop with it. He says, and you have to make peace with one another. He's talking about now, he's specifically talking to the Chavrei Knesset. You have to have unity. You have to make peace with one another. Enough of trying to bring down your fellow Chavrei Knesset. Enough of that.
מספיק עם זה בבורא עולם. תפסיקו עם הגאווה הזאת. היכנס לכם לבתים שלכם.
He says, stop, God is saying, stop with trying to bring down your fellow Chaver Knesset. He says, God is saying, I'll go into your houses. You know, in other words, there's a threat there. The Chaver Knesset have to unite.
נטפל לכם בתוך הבתים שלכם. אז אם תקללו את העולם, למה נולדתם בכלל? למה באתם לעולם בכלל?
Saying, I will go into your houses and you'll curse the day you were born.
נבחרתם לעזור לעם ישראל, לא לפרק ממשלה.
You were chosen in order to help Am Yisrael, not in order to bring down a government.
נבחרתם לעזור לעם היהודי, זה רק אתם בחיים.
You were chosen in order to help Am Yisrael.
בחר אתכם בורא עולם, לעזור לעם היהודי כללי. חרדים, דתיים, לא דתיים, שמאל וימין, לעזור לכולם. אין יוצאים מן הכלל. גם אזרחי ישראל הערבים שגרים בבית ישראל.
You were chosen in order to help all of Am Yisrael, to help all the citizens of Israel, even the Arabs. That's why you were chosen, to help all of the state of Israel. And that's your purpose, to help all the state of Israel in the general sense.
גם אם תושבים בארץ, מי שתושב בישראל, גם צריכים לעזור לו.
Also the residents, not just the citizens.
כי עם ישראל, הדבר הזה לא נשכח ולא נסלח, כי עם ישראל הם רחמנים בני רחמנים. באו לקראת החמאס, והחמאס בגד בהם, עשה מלכודת ליישובים ולקיבוצים בעוטף עזה ולצה"ל, לילדים האלה שהיה במסיבם, והתחיל להרוג ולטחון ולשחוט ולטבוח.
Okay, and now Rav Nir is going back to what occurred last Friday. He's saying Hamas planned this in advance. They had all these plans in order to attack the Yeshuvim and to attack the festival and to attack the children. And this is something we will never forget.
בלי לעשות חשבון לאף אחד. מזל שלנו לא מזל. זה בורא עולם עצת את החזבאללה שלא ייכנס עם 5,000 חיילים לכפרים. גם הם צריכים להפתיע.
And what we have to thank God that God prevented another 5,000 soldiers from Hezbollah, which were supposed to have attacked from the north. Now there's 3,000 Hamas warriors, terrorists came in from Gaza. What was supposed to occur on the same morning, 5,000 Hezbollah warriors, terrorists, were supposed to come in from the north. And God prevented the Hezbollah. And just to mention, that 2 days ago, Rav Nir said that God caused the Tower of Babel so that the Hezbollah just decided not to send their 5,000 troops. The Hezbollah had the exact same tactic as the Hamas. And the tactic is that they would go up to the border and do some small thing and then go away from the fence. They go up to the fence and then go away from the fence. Go up and back and forth. Up to the fence, do some sort of, throw a bomb or something, and then go away. And they did that for months beforehand. And so that the army got used to it. And so the army didn't think that there was going to be a major attack. They were fooled. This is what Rav Nir was talking about. Now, you have to be wary when he's been talking for over a year now. You have to be wary of what's going on, because this tactic of going up to the fence and then going away from the fence, it fooled the army, so that they were not prepared for a full-fledged attack. And the Hezbollah does the exact same thing on the Lebanese border, and the army has to be aware of that.
לבלבל את העם כאילו הם באים ולא באים, באים ולא באים, אז הצער נכנס לשאננות. גם מה שקרה ברצועת עזה. האמינו בבטון למטה, האמינו שאין מנהרות, יש מנהרות ליד זיקים. באזור של זיקים, מהים לכיוון שם, הצליחו לעבור שם, לבוא משם ובאים. יש מנהרות שחזרו לכיוון את ישראל.
He said what happened was that there was this lack of attention in the army, and they were complacent. The complacency of the army, and they thought there's a strong concrete wall, that they're not going to be able to penetrate the wall, and because of that complacency, the army wasn't ready at all for the major attack. And he's saying they also think that there are no tunnels. He says the fact is that there were tunnels, there are tunnels on the northern side of Gaza. He specifically mentioned this area on the Zikim beachfront where some of the terrorists came in.
באזור הזה שם, בסיבוב הזה, ככה. אז יש שם, עכשיו תפסו והורגים, כל פעם יוצאים משם, עכשיו פחות בהרבה, תפסו כל המשפחות בודדים שסתובבים בארץ, מחבלים. מתערבים עם הבדואים, מתערבים עם המסתתרים, אבל הם נחלשו, נגמר להם הסמים והאוכל, והתחילו לחזור לעצמם. אז הם כבר חושבים להתחילו להיות קצת בן אדם, קצת רגש.
He says, unfortunately, there's still some of the terrorists wandering around. He says now that the food is worn out and the drugs have worn off, so now they're returning a little more to the human state. Now, Rav Nir mentioned in the beginning, he's saying what Hamas did. They through ISIS, they obtain these drugs which drives a person crazy, who loses his all sense of humanity, and he becomes a killing machine. And he has this thirst for blood. And he has to kill. He doesn't make any distinction now between animal and human, and he just kills. That's all he can do. And it takes many days for this to slowly wear off. So he's just mentioning that unfortunately there still are some terrorists out there inside Israel, but they're less dangerous because the drugs and food have worn off.
אז הם לא במטבע כמו שביום הראשון שנכנסו, בימים הראשונים. כי בימים הראשונים חוסמים כבדים.
He said they're not at the same heightened level as they were on the first day. The first day, they were at their peak of this drug-induced bloodthirst.
כמו גורפן, או כמו אלה שהולכים להיאבקות, אז הם באים לזירה להיאבקות עם עוצמה, דירה של אנרגיה שלהם, חזקה מאוד להרוג אחד, לנצח את השני. המשחק נגמר להם כל החשמל, כל האנרגיה נגמרת להם. לא לוקחים סמים בספורט, אבל רואים לכל סמים כבדים. אז אנחנו נודה לבורא עולם כל שנייה בשנייה, למרות הכאב הנוראי העצום הזה שאין לו, אפשר לשכוח את זה לעולם בכל עם ישראל, אומרים בשמיים, ממטולה ועד אילת, אשדוד, ירושלים, ים המלח, כל המקומות, כולם פוחדים.
He said, so the bottom line is that we will thank God for where he did save us, and despite the fact that our hearts are broken, and everyone in the country, from Metula down to Eilat, everyone is heartbroken and is in sadness and in fear. Everybody in the nation is in that because of what occurred. Everyone is in shock, everyone is in trauma.
כל התקשורת, כל בית ובית, כל משפחה ומשפחה, כל חבר וחברים וחברה וחברות וחברים בבתי ספר, כולם מדברים בנושא שלהם מאותו יום של מלחמה, עד הרגע הזה מדברים איך האנשים האלה שחטו ואנסו והרגו ילדים וגולגולות ושמו בזד.
He says every single house in Israel is in this trauma and is talking about the horrible atrocities that occurred this past Shabbat.
ושרפו אנשים. עד הרגע הזה כל בית ובית לא מפסיקים לדבר. גם שהיו בצבא, לא היו בצבא, זקנים, לא משנה מה שהיו האנשים האלה. דבחו באוטובוס של זקנים בשדרות. הרגו את כל האנשים שפינו אותם ללכת במקום אחר בשדרות, הרגו את כולם.
Talking about, and he's beginning going to some details. He mentioned, for example, there was a bus load. They took elderly, the Hamas took elderly on a bus load of the elderly from Sderot and just killed them all.
אז אין סליחה ואין ישכח לעולם דבר כזה. אז כל עם ישראל מאילת ועד מטולה מדברים על הדברים האלה.
He said, so everyone in Israel is talking about it, and it will never be forgotten and never be forgiven.
כולם, כל העולם בכלל.
He says, it's not just Am Yisrael. The whole world is talking about it.
מזועזע. עד היום הזה, זה לא עזוב אתכם הרבה זמן. כמו מלחמת כיפור, לא עזבה אותנו כמעט 10 שנים, אנשים היו בשוק חייהם בפאניקה ומדברים על מלחמת כיפור. 10 שנים ולא יכולו לשכוח את המלחמה הזאת.
He says it'll be like the Yom Kippur War, that for 10 years after the Yom Kippur War, people were still in shock and talking about the atrocities that occurred. He says, so too, this war, these atrocities, it will stay with us for many years.
גם שם היו שהביאו חיילים ממדבר סיני, הרוגים, הביאו אותם על משאיות, והיו כמה ימים זרוקים בשטח, ואספו אותם על משאיות אחד על השני, וקברו אותם משמר הנגב ובהרי, בינתיים הוציאו אותם, הביאו אותם, שמו אותם בארגזים, נהלו, סגרו אותם, שמו אותם בארגזים, עד שמזל שם היה להם את הדיסקית, אז היו פחות או יותר מהם ומהם. מהטנקים, מהפגזים, מה שקרה בזמנו, ב-73.
The Rav Nir just talked about some of the atrocities in the Yom Kippur War.
אותו העניין בדיוק, בכמויות של מסעיות, באוטובוסים שמו אנשים. לבהריה עשו בוא ישר הרבה ושמו ארגז ליד ארגז, וכך שמו להם את השם שלהם, שהכירו אותם, לקחו אותם משם במקומות. זה אותו דבר בדיוק, רק לראות לכם, לא צריכים לו טנקים, לא נגמשים ולא כלום. עם RPG ועם נשק ששורף, מה הפכו את החצים, העולם שיגעו אותו. אז אנחנו, המזל שלנו, לא מזל שלנו, אומרים, הקדוש ברוך הוא הגן עלינו, ושם נעצרו, וקרה מה שקרה, נזק, נהרגו המון אנשים, נפצעו המון אנשים.
And he said, but the main point, what has to be remembered, is that we have to be thankful to God because he stopped the full brunt of the attack. And now Rav Nir will explain what the full brunt of the attack was supposed to be.
3,000 מחבלים ועוד 5,000 מוכנים ברצועת עזה, צריכים לקבל אישור מהם להיכנס, כי אחרי שכבשו את הקיבוצים, שהם יבואו עוד 5,000 ייכנסו.
Okay, so firstly, also from Gaza, it wasn't just the initial wave of 3,000. They also were supposed to send a second wave of terrorists, of 5,000 terrorists, to go further into Israel, down from the south. That's one of the stages.
אז לא הצליחו להיכנס, לא הצליחו לבוא, אז התחיל להפציץ, התחילו לגייס אנשים, התחילו השב"כ בה, בחיילים מיוחדים בה, בגולני, בצנחנים, כל מה שהיה צריך לבוא, מה שהיה יכול אפשר להגיע, הגיעו.
So what happened, they didn't send them because the army did by then was already in response, and so it was with the Shabak and the army that and the Golani that they were activated, and they were able to fight off the first 3,000, and so the Hamas didn't send the second wave. And that's basically the stories that we hear of with the army then cleaning the settlements around Otefaz, around the Gaza area. That is what prevented the second wave. Because if it wasn't prevented, then the second wave would come in. The terrorists would have gone in further into Netivot and into there from the rest of Israel. The terrorists simply would have continuing through Israel. But it doesn't stop there.
ניצלו גם כן שם, ועשו שמתם על נפשותיכם, לא הספיקו. אז בורא העולם עצר אותם, בורא העולם בכבודו ובעצמו בחיל צבא, גם על ישראל עצרו אותם.
And basically it was God, through Tzahal, God stopped it there with the 3,000. That is what occurred. And where the army then did respond in order to fight back Hamas that crossed the border. That is how God activated in order to stop the waves.
ודי שספר סיפורים, ידעו מלאכים, ידעו די שקר אנשים. בורא צבא הגנה לישראל, נהרגו חיילים כדי לעצור שלא ייכנסו לנתיבות.
And he said, and stop with the lies, he says, soldiers died in order to prevent this. There are many soldiers who fell in order to ensure that this wave would be stopped. They went in to prevent the wave from reaching Netivot, and they had to reconquer places like Sderot.
במקומות אחרים, זוג שקר, תגידו את האמת, לא יודעים את האמת, תשימו את הפה. אסור לשקר על העם ישראל. אז הקדוש ברוך הוא, נכנסו 3,000, ולא נכנסו 8,000 מחבלים.
He said, so you have to be grateful that only 3,000 terrorists entered Israel as opposed to 8,000 terrorists.
והקדוש ברוך הוא עצר את 5,000 חזבאללה שהיו כל אחד עם 4 RPG על הכתפיים שלהם.
And in addition to what we just mentioned in the south, God also prevented 5,000 warriors from Hezbollah, who were going to cross the border with 4 RPGs on each of their shoulders.
שלכל אחד יכול להילחם גם שבוע ברצף על הגוף שלהם.
So they had enough armament on their bodies to fight for a week. That's how their soldiers were trained.
ובואו להילחם נגד היישובים בגליל.
And they intended to attack the Yeshuvim there in the Galilee.
שם הקדוש ברוך הוא עצר אותם, לא נתן להם להיכנס.
And so there, God prevented them from even crossing the border. But it was God who prevented them from crossing the border.
עצר אותם בדרך שלנו, לא יודעים איך עצר אותם. זה הקדוש ברוך הוא. זה הקדוש ברוך הוא.
He says God stopped them in a way that no one knows. That is what God did. We don't know exactly how God stopped them, but he stopped them from crossing the border on the north.
זה הקדוש ברוך הוא. ולא שום צדיקים ולא שום דמיונות.
He says it was God. Don't say it was any tzaddik or any imagination. He said it was God himself who stopped the Hezbollah from crossing the border.
לא שום מלאכים. זה הקדוש ברוך הוא בכבודו בעצמו עצר את הכניסה של חזבאללה באותו לילה בשבת בחג של שמחת תורה של עם ישראל.
It was God himself. It wasn't an angel. It was God himself that stopped the Hezbollah from crossing the border that night of Simchat Torah.
שהיהודים שישמוח בתורת השם. זה הקדוש ברוך הוא עצר, אם לא, היו מגיעים מתל אביב, גם היו באים משומרון, היו באים.
He said, if God didn't stop them, they would have reached Tel Aviv by going down south through the Shomron and then into Tel Aviv.
כפרים ערביים, היו באים יוצאים מתחת לאדמה עם מלא RPG ומלא נשק כבד מאוד שגנבו מבסיסי צה"ל.
He says, because on the way, the local Arabs, the Arabs that live in Israel, would have then joined into these forces and then pulled out all the weapons that they have. They have very heavy weapons. They have RPGs. They have the Arabs, the Israeli Arabs have heavy weapons, which they've stolen from the Israeli army bases.
שיכולים לכבוש את טורקיה, יכולים לכבוש אותם בנשק שהיה להם. אז תודה רבה, הקדוש ברוך הוא על הכל.
So you have to thank God for everything that you did.
תודה רבה, ריבונו של עולם, שעם ישראל חי וקיים. זה האמת, זה תפרסמו את האמת הזאת.
He says, that's the truth. That's the truth that you have to publicize. To thank God for what he prevented from occurring.
אם לא היו נכנסים 5,000 חזבאללה, היו מגיעים, מה השם ישמע ברחם. היו באים גם מירדן, גם מדבר סיני לכיוון אילת.
He says, you have to thank God that he stopped. He says, because if they did come in and did everything that he just said, he says, and then Jordan would have joined in, and from Sinai they would have joined in, and they would have then even tried to conquer Eilat. He said they had plans. They had plans to attack all of Israel.
צריך לכתוש אותם עם חיל האוויר והים והתותחים כמה ש...
So now, Rav Nir, you have to thank God. He says, and now what we have to do, you have to crush them from the air and from the sea. You have to crush them. In other words, the implication is by using the missiles, by bombs, bombarding them.
החמאס זרע עמלק מוכנים להתאבד ולומר שישראל גרמה להם להתאבד.
He said the Hamas is Amalek and they are willing to commit suicide just so that they can say that Israel killed them.
לא להתרגש משום מדינה בעולם.
Do not be don't be moved or excited by any nation of the world. In other words, don't let any nation of the world veer you from what has to be done.
תקשיבו טוב טוב, למרות שביידן נחת בישראל, צריך להראות לו הכל.
Okay, and he's saying that despite that Biden came to Israel, says what you have to do, you have to show him everything, show him everything that they did. I'm going to stop here because what Rav Nir said about Biden, Naomi translated into English. I'm going to send it to you in WhatsApp just because of the timing, and I just want to get another. I want to do a little more. I'm going to skip to minute 46.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm not on the WhatsApp group that you have. How do I get on it? This is fascinating.
If you got the Gina Plus, if you got, you know what? If you send me you see my email address.
Yeah.
Send me your phone number, and I'll have you join the group. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
My pleasure. Okay, and thank you for asking. I'm happy people shouldn't hesitate to speak up. We're going to continue.
ולא נחת ממנו. השאלה נשאלת פה, אז מה, הקדוש ברוך הוא לא יכול לשלוט בהם שיעשו מה שהוא רוצה?
Okay, now I've jumped ahead. Now Rav Nir is actually, he read a little bit from the Zohar, and he's going to go, this I thought, in order to give you, we're going to go back, and as we had a little bit of the news, as Rav Nir says, this is the news from God. What the description of what occurred before, everything, you're not going to hear it anywhere else. And now he's going to go back more to understand the spiritual side. And so he's going to begin describing, we're going to start by once again describing the story of Adam and Eve. Okay?
נחזור אחורה. ברא את אדם הראשון בחווה. ואמר להם אל תאכלו מעץ הדעת וברע. בא הנחש אשתו של סמך מ' פיתתה את חווה.
Okay, so God creates Adam and Eve. He tells them, don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and bad. And then comes the snake, which I've described before. The snake is basically the evil force incarnate. The snake is the power of the evil force. You know, the Zohar says it's the angel of death. It's all the same force. So the snake came and convinced Eve that she can eat the apple, right? Can eat from the tree of knowledge. And the snake then also implanted, they had relations and implanted his impurity into Eve. And they ate from the tree of knowledge, both Adam and Eve. And as a result of all that, the whole world was basically changed in a negative fashion. The whole world was lowered in a spiritual level. That is what occurred. Everything was lessened. Everything, the land, the animals, the bird, everything basically fell from its high spiritual level as a result of what Adam and Eve did.
כדור הארץ, ושישי במקום להיות קדוש וטהור, ואדם אשר משיח ואשתו איתו, חווה איתו, עם משיח, הכל התערבב, נהיה האדמה לא שומעת בקול הקדוש ברוך הוא, ולא העצים ולא החיות ולא בני אדם, עם אדם הראשון.
And instead of what was supposed to occur, in other words, Adam and Eve, Adam was supposed to be Mashiach, and this has all occurred right there. That Friday, that Shabbat was supposed to be the beginning of the Geula, of the redemption. And instead of achieving that level, this high level of moving the creation that God created freshly then, moving it into then the redemption era, but he wanted mankind to partake in that creation. Instead, occurred what occurred with Adam and Eve, and the whole thing fell. And Adam did not become Mashiach.
אז כל מה שבא לכבודו, לכבוד אדם השם ואשתו, הכל שומעים לקדוש ברוך הוא. ובא אדם הראשון, אמר לו, כל זה שלך, בראתי לך את החיות, את הבהמות, את הדגים, את העצים, הכל לך.
Just to understand, when God created man, God said, all of this whole world is just for you. All the animals and all the land and all the oceans, all of this I created for you to move on to the next stage, to this higher stage, to the stage of redemption.
ואל תחטא, ואל תאכל מעץ הדעת טוב ורע. תשמע שאני אומר לך, ויזהיר אותו ויזהיר אותם.
And God said, he said, all I'm asking, he says, don't sin. He said, don't eat from the tree of knowledge. And God warned him, do not eat from the tree of knowledge. Adam and Eve were warned several times by God, do not eat from the tree of knowledge.
לא עזר כלום. ולא היה להם יצרה בגוף. ולא היה להם יצרה...
He says, but it didn't help. And what's even sadder is they didn't at that time even have the Yetzer Hara. They didn't have the evil inclination inside their body. They were at a higher level. And it didn't help. They fell.
בגוף לאדם השם ואשתו, לא שעכשיו יש לנו יצרה בגוף משפיע עלינו. עכשיו חוסר איזון. לא היה להם כלום.
He says they didn't have, Adam and Eve didn't have the problems that we have today. Today, because of the sin and all that, we always have this battle of good and evil inside our hearts, right? Good and evil is so intermeshed in this world that makes it more difficult. They didn't have that problem, and still they fell. And so God gave them freedom of choice. He gave Adam and Eve freedom of choice, and then he sent them the test with the snake. And that was a test to see how they chose. And unfortunately, the snake was able to persuade Eve to fall, and Eve dragged down Adam, and the rest is history. And they brought death to the world. In other words, mankind was supposed to live forever. That was how man was created. And the punishment of death to man occurred because of the sin of Adam and Eve.
אז באותו זמן בורא עולם הולך עם הבחירה החופשית של האדם. מכה פה כדי שיבחרו בטוב.
And so ever since then, God allows man to continue with his freedom of choice, but he hits you over here, he hits you over there to direct you. Every time you veer off the right path, it gives you a slap. You veer off to the wrong path over there, it gives you another slap. He says, and the whole world, all of history is basically fixing what Adam and Eve were supposed to have done. That's what we have been doing. All of world history is basically to fix the sin of Adam and Eve. But now we're at the end. And this is the last fixing, the last tikkun that we have to do. He says, and that's it. There are no more souls, new souls that have to be brought to this world. That's right. When you have a child, it's a new neshama that comes to the world. There are no more new neshamot. That's already been for a few years, approximately 15 years at least, when Harav Nir said that there are no new neshamot. And so all that you now have when you have a new child in this world, it's what's called a neshama mitnadevet, a volunteer neshama. They volunteer to do work. It's an old neshama that volunteers to come down to this earth. See, the main purpose of a neshama is to come down and fix what Adam and Eve did. But there are no more neshamot that have to fix. Now there are many neshamot mitnadvot, volunteer neshamot. There are now many volunteer neshamot. Basically, it started, as I said, approximately not 15 years. It's actually closer to 20 years that we've finished that we've already been having these volunteer neshamot in the world.
יהודים הרבה מתנדבות כדי, הם באים לא בכוחם, באים להתנדב לעזור לעם ישראל, ובזה יצאת משיח. יהודי כי למה באים משלמות מתנדבות? כי אם יש משיח לצאת, אז לא ימות על בני אדם. זה כבר מקדימים, כמו שיבואו בתחיית המתים.
So basically, what these neshamot who volunteer to come now early to help out, bring Mashiach, and then the whole idea is because in any event, once Mashiach is revealed, then you have Tchiyat HaMetim, right? Revival of the dead. And so basically, they decide to come a little early. That's it. They decide to come early.
מבנים, הנשמות מתנדבות, במקום לבוא בתחיית המתים, אנחנו עכשיו יודעים שמשיח צריך לצאת. ותחיית המתים, אנחנו פה בעולם הזה איתכם, לעולמים, אז בהם להתנדב לעזור.
So basically, these neshama that are now here, they came early, a little before Tchiyat HaMetim, in order to help out in bringing Mashiach, and so that Mashiach be publicly revealed.
פשוט, לא פשוט בכלל, אבל זה מילים פשוטות.
He says, I'm using simple words so that you understand. I mean, the words are very simple. It's not a simple concept. And this I want to stress, that everything that I've described up until now, as simple as it may be, it's all very deep. I could speak literally for hours to explain more details in terms of what Rav Nir has already said.
לא פשוט שום דבר. זה בדיוק אבל, שתדעו לכם. מוצא קורת רוח עם הטוב, דהיינו מעשים הטובים של בני אדם. אמר לרבי עקיבא, רבי אליעזר, דברך מה יתעצב בליבו שמשמעו, נתעצב אשר לא נעשה דבר כרצונו, מה שאמרנו עכשיו, ספירה חופשית, לא הקדוש ברוך הוא לא רוצה להשפיע על האדם, עכשיו הוא משפיע, עכשיו הקדוש ברוך הוא לוקח הרבה מהבחירה החופשית ומתחיל להכות. להשפיע על הבני אדם שילכו ידבקו אליו, בכוח, אין לו ברמה מעשות.
Okay, so now what God is doing, he read a little more from the Zohar, and then he says what God basically is doing is he's lessening the freedom of choice of man. And he's hitting us in order to make sure that we choser b'tshuva, that we become connected once again with God.
זאת אומרת, בכוח, כי הוא רוצה להציל אותם. לא שצריך אותם כדי להציל אותם, אבל כדי להציל אותם הוא צריך להשפיע בכוח. למה צריך להכות ולהשפיע על בני אדם חזק עכשיו? כי הגיע הקו האדום של העולם.
Okay, so basically what God is saying, he's willing now, why is God now willing to interfere with freedom of choice? Before, he didn't want to interfere with freedom of choice. But now God is willing to interfere with freedom of choice. Why? Because we've come to the red line. Kav Adom. We've come to the red line. In other words, the world has reached the end. And so now God is willing to be more forceful in his actions, and these slaps here and slaps there in order to save us. God is trying to save as many of Am Yisrael, and that is why he's going to begin lessening more and more the freedom of choice. Things will become so very clear that you won't have freedom of choice.
העולם לא יכול להמשיך בלי משיח, קדימה. העולם נהיה, כל העולם 8-9 מיליארד אנשים נהיו משוגעים מפוסחים על המוח.
He said, we've come to the red line. He said, without Mashiach, without the divine intervention of Mashiach, now the world has come to an end. Those 8 billion people would go crazy if Mashiach is not revealed.
כולם שום פסיכיאטר יכול לעזור להם. נהיו משוגעים מטורפים.
He says, no psychologist will be able to help them. They'll just simply go crazy. The whole world will simply go crazy.
8.5 מיליארד אנשים בעולם. אם לא יצא משיח עכשיו, יהיה מלחמת העולם שלישית שלא הייתה כזה בעולם, לא ישאר אף אחד.
He said, if Mashiach doesn't come out, then there will be Third World War. And it will be an atomic war, which man cannot survive.
Wait, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, why would the world go crazy? Because why?
Because of the situation, the world, we're at the brink of World War III now. And that because of, and the world, you see many of the nations already at the brink. I mean, since the Cold War, we have not had such a threat of nuclear war. And so what Rav Nir is explaining says we've gotten, once again, worse. We've gotten to a worse point than since the Cold War. That if Mashiach doesn't reveal himself publicly in the near future, we will end up in a nuclear war. And nuclear war is not survivable. There's no survivor. Rav Nir will explain. I don't say this in order to scare you, but just so that you understand what is being said.
לא יישארו לא מקלטים ולא בונקרים ולא מטוסים ולא 32 ולא 35 ולא 18 ולא 20 ולא חלליות ולא כדור הארץ והכל איתו ובוא.
He says, don't think that anything can survive. There are no bunkers that can survive atomic war. He'll explain why. He says all of mankind will be wiped out if nuclear war were to occur. But it will not occur.
אז הקדוש ברוך הוא, בגלל שהגיע קו אדום, אז הוא מתחיל ללחוץ על האנשים, להכות אותם, לקחת את הבחירה האישית כדי להציל אותם.
And so God will not allow that to occur. God didn't create the world so that we can destroy the world. God will not allow this to occur. And so therefore, in order to save mankind, God has now basically agreed he's now going to get involved with freedom of choice. Man will have less and less freedom of choice, and that will be shown in more and more extreme things that occur in the world, whether they be natural disasters or whatever, whereby it will be very clear to you. And there is no more freedom of choice in that sense. I know something occurs so crazy that you clearly understand the message. And God is doing this because he's now going to save the world.
בשביל להציל אותם, לקחת את הבחירה, אם יש לנו בחירה אישית, לא, אנחנו מאמינים בקדוש ברוך הוא, לפי מה שאנחנו מאמינים בה שאנחנו רוצים. אין דבר כזה, יש הלכה. יש דרך ארץ, זה הלכה, עשרת דיברות, יש הלכה, תרק מצוות. אתה לא תאמין בקדוש שאתה רוצה. אני שם כיפה כקליפה של תפוז, אני שם כיפה של קק של קוקה קולה. אני שם כיפה, מה שזעקים תעתם בקדוש ברוך הוא. אני שם ציצית על האוזניים. אני מתפילים רק על הראש, על הרגל. די עם השטויות האלה. אין דת מה שאתה רוצה, יש הלכות ותרק מצוות.
He says there are rules for this world, and Am Yisrael has to lachzor b'tshuva. He says you can't make up halachot. There are halachot. You have to do the halachot. He says enough of the narishkeit. He says God is going to have you all chozer b'tshuva.
כולם יחזרו בתשובה. עכשיו הקדוש הוא לוחץ ומקם בגלל שיכנסו כולם מעגל הראשון להתגלות מלך המשיח בן דוד.
And God is pressuring you so that you all of Am Yisrael will enter the first ring around Mashiach and enter the Geula.
אז יש לכם מקו אדום, או משיח יוצא לעולם, או נחרב העולם.
He said, we've come to the red line, and either Mashiach is revealed or the world ends.
סוף העולם נמצא עכשיו, כל רגע ברגע, קו אדום, תקווים אליו, אז בעולם בלחץ דוחק את כולם, לוחץ על כולם, מהר, כדי להציל הרבה יהודים, להיות במעגל הראשון לעולם העולמים, לא ימותו לעולם.
And God, because we've come to the red line, and there's no choice, God is now going to increase the pressure in order to make sure as many Jews chozem b'tshuva, and they are then with the Mashiach, and then they have eternal life. In other words, death is removed. There is no death on this earth. I'm not talking about heaven. I'm talking about this earth. And so basically, God is taking away the freedom of choice because there's no more time.
לא שהוא בגלל שהוא מתערב בבחירה חופשית, כי הוא הולך להציל אותם. כשמצילים בן אדם, לא עושים חשבון, מכים אותו, מרביצים לו, מרמים אותו, לוקחים אותו, לא משנה מה עושים כדי להציל אותו. כדי להציל אדם. כשהוא רוצה להציל אותם, אז הוא מכה את עם ישראל.
He says, and basically, you can't make a claim, no, you have to preserve freedom of choice. In order to save lives, God is going to put that aside. Now, for pikuach nefesh, he's putting it all aside. In order to save Am Yisrael, freedom of choice will be lessened.
כדי שהוא כולם במעגל הראשון. כי יש קו אדום. יש קו אדום לפני שהתעופו באוויר 2,000 טילי אטום, מספיק 4, העולם נחרב, אבל צריך 2,000.
He says, in order to destroy, you have to understand, the red line is because he says, you don't even need 2,000 atomic weapons. There are more than 2,000. There are tens of thousands of atomic weapons. He says, less than 2,000 destroys the world.
1,000, מע 12,000, 18,000, כל אחד יש לו כמה אלפים, בכל העולם כמעט. כל אחד חזק כפתורים. אני חושב שהמקלט שלו, הבור שלו יותר חזק משני, שום דבר לא יעזור. יחנקו מהריח, לא יוכלו לצאת, ייגמר להם החמצן בתוך.
He says there are tons of countries that have nuclear wars. There are tens of thousands of nuclear weapons. You don't need all that. Less than 2,000 and the world is destroyed. He says, you think you can hide out in a bunker? He says the atomic bombs go off and the radiation then cuts off the filter system, and there's no air. The people will just die in the bunkers. People they fool themselves thinking they can survive nuclear attack.
המסנן שאב את האטום, המסננים של המקלטים של הבורות הכי גבוהים, הכי חזקים, בבונקרים הכי גדולים בעולם, ישאבו רוח האוויר של האטום. והאוויר הזה יסתום את המסננים.
He's describing how the filtration systems work in these very sophisticated bunkers, nuclear bunkers. He says once they're triggered by the radiation, then the filters shut down. There is no filtration. There is no air that goes in.
כשסתמו המסננים, הם ינשמו אטום ויחנקו וימותו. לא יהיה זכר של בן אדם, אם תמלחם את האטום.
So the bottom line is that man cannot survive nuclear war. If there were nuclear war, mankind cannot survive.
העולם הוא לא בא להחליט את העולם, הוא לא יחליט את העולם. אני אומר לכם במיליון אחוז בשמיים, בורא העולם, דברי אלוקים חיים. הוא לא ייתן להיות מלחמת העולם שלישית.
And however, I am telling you, from God did not create this world in order for it to be destroyed. A million times for sure. God is not going to allow World War III to occur. He is not going to allow it. The only thing that God will allow is for Mashiach to be revealed. That's the only thing that God will allow.
אז הקדוש ברוך הוא מכה את עם ישראל היום, בכל השנתיים, 3 אחורה, 4 שנים, מכה אותם חזק. מקורונה, לממשלת שינוי, לבחירות, להפגנות, עוד פעם קורונה, ועכשיו מלחמה הזאת שהייתה.
And he says, and so therefore, for the past 4 years, God has been upping the pressure. And so he brought us huge amount of pressure, whether it was Corona, or whether it was the small skirmishes, or whether it was the protests, or the present war. All of this is building up these huge makot in order to make sure that we follow what God wants.
דברים קשים עוברים על עם ישראל, מכות. ועכשיו הוא לא יפסיק עד שכולם ייכנסו למעגל הראשון.
And now God is not going to stop until everyone enters the first circle around Mashiach, so that everyone is saved.
נגאולה, כשלא ימותו הכוונה.
In other words, they enter Gula and they live forever.
אז הוא מעביר, נכנס אליהם בכוח. הוא קח את הבחירה החופשית ושולט בהם.
And so therefore God is going to now work with koach, with force, and he's going to lessen freedom of choice.
זה המצב שקיים, זה האמת של הדברים האמיתיים, דברי אלוקים חיים.
This is exactly what God is saying, and everything that was described is the truth. I'm going to stop share now, and thank you all for joining. I know there's a lot of food for thought here. I highlight the fact to have faith in the words that God will not allow World War III. God is with us. He saved us from Hezbollah, even though we went through extremely difficult week or 12 days now. But God is always saving us. We will come out of this. And I just stress that the message is unity, achdut. That's what we have to work on. You want to do something, read Tehillim. Harav Nir talks about the importance of reading Tehillim. Start from chapter 1 and go through according to the order. Just begin reading, put a bookmark when you're finished, and continue from that bookmark onwards. There's no chapter of Tehillim which is better. Just read the parak of Tehillim for Am Yisrael, for the defense of the IDF, for the security forces, and we will all hear very good news in the near future. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining, and look forward to learning with you next week. Shabbat Shalom.